Hi, everyone. I'll just give us a couple of minutes while we get people tuned in, and feel free to write in the chat where you're joining us from. San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Philadelphia. Carlsbad, Buffalo. How exciting. Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Erin. I'm currently the interim events manager here at Book Larder in Seattle, Washington. Our bookstore is all cookbooks and food writing, and we're also doing cooking classes and author talks. We started doing virtual author talks during here on Zoom during the pandemic, and it's been really nice to continue doing them as it allows us to gather and connect all over the world and the country. So we're excited to welcome Heather Mubarak, recipe developer, photographer, and creator of the popular baking blog, Brown Butter Blondie. And her debut book, Stuffed, is all about sandwich cookies with whimsical recipes for every occasion and craving, and we're excited to learn more about it. Heather will be in conversation with Brian Hart Hoffman, the editor-in-chief of Bake from Scratch, one of the world's largest baking platforms with magazines, best-selling cookbooks, and more dedicated to celebrating the global community. And we're going to have time at the end to, they're going to answer questions. So please submit your questions in the Q&A button on the Zoom toolbar. And we also have closed captioning available, which you can enable using the live transcript button, if that's helpful for you. And lastly, this talk will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel in the next day or two. So you'll be able to watch it back or share it with friends. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Heather Mubarak and Brian Hart Hoffman.
Hi.
Hello, I am so excited that we are doing this chat, and hello to everyone joining from all over the West Coast, all over the East Coast, all over the world. Bakers unite for this amazing night as we celebrate Heather's amazing book. Yay! I know you're ordering it right now. And if you do not already have your order in for the book, I know that there will be a link posted in the chat. So the team at Book Larder will take really good care of you in getting a copy of this amazing book on the way to you. Heather was telling me just as we got started, she signed a lot of the book. So you'll be getting signed copies from the Book Larder. So amazing. And you'll be supporting an amazing culinary bookstore that I love so much. I have had the pleasure of doing some in-store demonstrations and author talks. And I used to live in Seattle. So this is near and dear to my heart to be a part of tonight's event, but I am tuning in from Birmingham, Alabama, the home of Hoffman Media and Bake from Scratch. So I am in my video studio kitchen where I do my weekly baking classes. And Heather, you're joining us from home, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm home in gloomy San Diego, but the gray skies again.
I think we're just in sympathy with Seattle for the rainy skies. Birmingham has been raining all day. I feel like, it's just our little ode to the rain in Seattle that I was hearing about today too. So,
Yeah, it's just a mood. We're going to have to go with it.
yeah. Hey, and you know what makes people happy on rainy days? Baking.
Cookies. Yep.
Cookies. Well, I mean, I have so many things we're going to chat about tonight, but I always want to start let's start at the beginning. Tell everyone about your journey into baking. Heather and I did record a podcast episode that's going to be out soon where I've already gotten to pick her brain on some stuff. So I already have nuggets of information that I want her to share with everyone, and just how amazing your journey into baking and the sweet world is. But take us to the very beginning. Talk about baking as a passion, and then you can share a little bit about the sweet business you were in prior to jumping in the baking blogging world. So just a little bit of your journey.
Sure. Okay, so I would say that my entry into the food space began back in 2009 when I started an English almond toffee business with a secret family recipe. So it was a family that my husband's grandmother had been making for years. We would make it every year at Christmas time, I think for probably a decade when my husband and I were first married. And we would give it to everyone that we knew, friends, family, neighbors, the firemen down the street, teachers, coaches, everybody got toffee for Christmas. And one year, after about a decade of giving it away at the holidays, I decided it was a really great idea to package it and mass produce it and sell it wholesale and retail all over the nation. So I didn't know anything about mass producing confectionery, items, nothing about large scale production, but I figured it out one step at a time. And before I knew it, I was running my own commercial kitchen in Carlsbad, California, and we were producing thousands and thousands of pounds of toffee a year, selling it to places like Williams-Sonoma, Whole Foods, Safeway, Vons, Sur La Table, Nordstrom Online. It was everywhere. And fast forward to 2014, I ended up selling the business. I stayed on for a couple of years as head of sales to keep things moving, and then my time was up. So as I promised my husband, I took about a year off to do nothing. I picked up a couple hobbies. I baked some cookies at home, and I just was mom for a bit, which was a lovely break. But after a while, I got the itch to do something again, and I knew that I wanted to do something creative. And it didn't take long for me to figure out that I really was happiest in the kitchen. So in 2018, I started my blog, Brown Butter Blondie. And a couple of years later, I decided it was time to write a book.
And that book is here, and it is so beautiful.
Yes,
before we talk about the book, I asked you about this yesterday, but I have to ask it again for everyone watching tonight.
Yeah.
You had to tell Martha Stewart that you would not share the recipe for that toffee. In the culinary world, listen, I can say no to a lot of people about a lot of things.
Right.
Martha Stewart asked you for it. And how did you handle this?
Well, I basically just had to say, I'm so sorry, it's a secret family recipe. And if I give you the recipe, I don't have a business anymore, right? So yeah, she wanted to have the toffee on the show. She wanted me to come on the show and make the toffee and give the recipe out. So long story short, it ended up being the toffee was on the show. It was a great moment for me. It was on her Valentine's Day special, and it was a highlight of my toffee career for sure. But yes, no, I had to keep that. We had kept that recipe secret for so many years, and people asked us every holiday for the recipe. Or like I told you yesterday, sometimes they would say, okay, well, if you won't give me the recipe, will you at least make me some more? So
hey, demand led to that success, and what a sweet story it is. And then your sweet journey continued into the launch of your blog and your content creation. I really have moved away from talking about someone being a blogger because
yes,
there's so much that goes into it. And I don't think the world really understands. I mean, you're developing recipes. You are doing the photos. You took every photo of every recipe in the book. You are your own stylist, recipe developer. I mean, all the things, right?
Dishwasher.
You are a content creator, and a really, really dang good one at that. And in this world of content creation, in the world of your website and Instagram and social media, how did you narrow down the subject matter of a book to be cookie sandwiches or sandwich cookies? That's another divisive one. Which order do you say the words? But who cares? They're all delicious, right?
Exactly. It doesn't really matter. It just matters that they taste good.
Yeah.
So I knew pretty early on when I decided, made the definitive decision I was going to write a book. I said, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to do it the right way. I'm going to get the agent and write the proposal and shop the book and That's what we did. But when I made that decision, I knew I wanted my first cook to be a cookie book because I really enjoyed making cookies. Everyone loves cookies. I had a lot of really successful cookies on the blog already. But there are so many amazing cookie books out there, as you know, Brian, yours being one of them, the Cookie Collection, which I love. And so I knew that it had to be different in a way, because otherwise, you know, I'm just sort of this new person on the block. People will be like, oh, there's another cookie book. I already have 10. So I knew it had to be cookies with a twist. And that's where I came up with the idea to do the cookie sandwiches. So I will say that there are 65 sandwich cookie recipes in the book, but each of the cookies can be made as a standalone cookie. You don't have to turn it into a full-blown ice cream sandwich or a buttercream filled sandwich cookie. If you're not feeling that indulgent, you know, in the moment, you can just make a batch of cookies and all the recipes are amazing.
Well, I just have to say, you know, the front of the book is filled with so much information, and we're going to talk about this in a minute. You've got like make ahead tips, you've got substitution tips, like all the questions that I think bakers really want to know, the 13 items that we should have in the kitchen. You've got them in the book for bakers to know what to do in the beginning. But I have to start by saying the first 2 recipes in this book, number 1 and number 2, took me back to childhood memories of cravings and cookies that to this day I absolutely love. And we're going to start with just this chocolate chip cookie with the amazing vanilla buttercream that can be used in so many different ways. I mean, my ideas are already going crazy just with this. You know, this took me back to the line at the Great American Cookie Company, getting the double doozy and begging my mom, like, please let me get the one with the icing and 2 cookies and all that. That was a real creative way for them to sell 1 cookie with all that in it.
Exactly.
Then we move on to this oatmeal cream pie. My other childhood favorite. Look at this photo. Not only is it beautiful, you took the photo, you styled it so amazing. These recipes are epic. But we are starting the book with 2 of like the most craveable things ever. And then we go from there.
Right.
How did you decide the chapters? How did you get into the organization of where you wanted this journey to go in making these, you know, amazing sandwich cookies?
Well, I think that right off the bat, I knew that the best way to organize the book was going to be by craving, because when I think about dessert, usually I'm craving chocolate, but other people might be craving other things. For me, it's always chocolate. But you know, you're craving a certain taste, a certain flavor, a certain combination. So I just knew that craving was probably going to be the best way to go. Now, Oldies But Goodies chapter, which is the first chapter in the book, is a little bit offset from that because it kind of envelops a lot of different flavors, really. But it's that those classic recipes with a little bit of a twist.
At the heart. It tugs at the heart.
It's that nostalgic bake that you remember from when you were a kid, or something that's just like, there's a carrot cake cookie in there. And that's just sort of because, you know, we all love carrot cake at the, you know, Easter time. And it's just, again, it's very nostalgic, iconic flavor. So those are the cookies that you start with. And then you branch into things like For the Love of Chocolate, which is my favorite chapter. We have fruity cookies in Tart and Tangy is the name of the chapter. We have spicy cookies, and that's a fun chapter. It's called Cookies with a Kick. Yes, we go into ice cream sandwiches, and those are the cool cookies, which that was a fun chapter to name. There was a lot of names on the list for that chapter, but cool cookies was perfect in my mind. So yeah, so there's something for everyone, because no 2 cravings are the same when it comes to dessert or cookies. And so there's really something for everyone, and you can mix and match to your heart's content.
And that's what I love, you know, this mix and match thing. I talk a lot about bake it your own. I feel like in the baking world, you know, we know science and the exactness and ratios and how something's going to turn out. But I think sometimes home bakers feel like the recipe is restricted to this one way and you have to do it the one way. Now, you and I both agree that people should make a recipe once, see what we did here, figure out what you like about it. But then you get the journey that you give people the mix and match in the book. So maybe you want this like triple chocolate decadent thing. You can go find all the chocolate things you want and make this amazing creation.
Yep.
How did you, you know, because ice cream, you know, we think about ice cream in the summertime. So yesterday you mentioned one flavor that I want you to talk about, because it's definitely not a flavor people tend to crave in March, April, May in the springtime. But what was that flavor and why do you think it's so relevant right now?
Oh, the pumpkin spice sugar cookie?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I literally almost got off that call and went and made them, because when it's gloomy and gray outside like this, all you want to do is bake something cozy and warm and like literally curl up on the couch by the fire. And just, it's a pumpkin spice sugar cookie in the book. and it's absolute heaven. You must make them in July. They're a year-round cookie in my book. And it's filled with a brown butter cream cheese frosting, which really just makes all the flavors in the cookie sing. And it's just a wonderful combination of flavors. And I think, like you were saying, there's no right or wrong, or do it this way or do it that way when it comes to cravings. So if you just are a pumpkin lover, then there's no reason that you need to be only making that cookie in the fall.
And when you said it yesterday, it stuck with me that, it's a flavor profile that I love. And I think making pumpkin spice things year round or whenever you crave it, hey, food is whatever you want it to be, right? You crave something,
Absolutely.
You should enjoy it.
Yes.
And I love that you mix it with ice cream, make it a sandwich cookie for the summer, do something that really, breaks outside of the Starbucks told us we have to order it in October way of thinking about things. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, we got to break away and do our own thing.
Absolutely.
In the front of the book, I do want you to talk people through this. And before we get there, I just want to show people, this is one of those squishy books that the cover's like a cushion. And I feel like I could just lay my head on it and sleep at night because it's that amazing and so cozy. But in the beginning of the book, you go into ingredient breakdown. So we'll talk about a few of those ingredients in a minute. But one of the things you do is you talk about equipment and how you make substitutions. Because in today's world of ingredients and things that are available for gluten-free or for vegan and things that people want to substitute, you give people this guide. And I want you to just talk a little bit about what went into that and like how we tackle these recipes in all these different ways with information for bakers to make it their own journey at home.
Yeah, so I wanted this book to be really accessible to all bakers. I think that there's a lot of bakers obviously out there that are very advanced and they're probably just inventing their own cookies at home. But, we all like to pick up a cookbook now and then. So I wanted there to be cookies in here that an advanced baker would enjoy. But I really want it to be super accessible to people that are just beginning their baking journey or really don't bake much at all, or they're going to give it to someone and they have no idea if they bake. So I spent a lot of time in the beginning of the book and the introduction and the pages after that, really kind of diving into what I use to make my cookies not only look great, but also taste great. So we talk about ingredients, we talk about equipment. And when I talk about equipment, it's not fancy. There's nothing, I'm talking about parchment paper, for people like me who are super type A and perfectionist, a ruler, kitchen scale. I talk about the pros and cons of the stand mixer versus a hand mixer. If you don't have a stand mixer, and it's absolutely totally fine to use a hand mixer, we really can make a batch of cookies with a bowl and a whisk. I mean, let's be honest. But it does make your life easier to do it with a stand mixer, and it makes cleanup a little bit easier, I think, too. So anyway, I spent a lot of time kind of going through those things and as well as the ingredients, because I wanted to give people as much information as possible to help them make the recipe successfully as I did in the book.
And you mentioned the scale, and I just have to weigh in and tell all of the bakers watching from home, every recipe in here, you give gram weights for each ingredient. And it is truly the most transformative way for people to bake. And it really is the international language of baking, is baking by weight instead of, tablespoons and cups and half cups and quarter cups. Right. That if you travel around the world, different countries have different size of a tablespoon, different size of a teaspoon. And so it can be very confusing, hard to understand what's in the recipe. But weight in grams is always going to be there. And you give that in every recipe the same way we do at Bake From Scratch. So I love that we're connected on this. Well,
it's important to say though, too, that if you're really a stickler and you refuse to get a scale, there are the volume, the cups and the tablespoons. Yes. It provides both for every recipe, but I highly recommend that scale because it will change your baking game.
It's always my number one plead, to a baker, we're going to give you the measurements and cups and all of that. Yes, it's in everything and in your book too, but to have accurate results, you have a scale. And then the other thing I want us to talk about is ingredient usage of salt. I want us to let's talk about salt, because so many people, I think it can be a divisive subject, not divisive in a bad way, but people that I'm going to let you take it from here because I love what you said earlier, but yeah, salt, take it away in cookies.
So actually, I think there's in the book, there's a whole section about salt because I wanted to clarify in my recipe ingredient list. Sometimes it says salt, sometimes it says kosher salt, sometimes it says flaky sea salt. There's like a lot of salt options out there. And most people just stock their pantry, honestly, with one kind of salt, especially if you're not a big cook or a big baker. So then you're in there looking at your salts going, I don't know, which salt am I supposed to use? So a lot of recipes call for just plain old regular salt, but most of my recipes actually call for kosher salt, which I really love. And you usually end up using a little bit less of that than you would a table salt. Flaky sea salt is, in my book, mandatory on top of any chocolate chip or chocolate flavored cookie, because it adds that extra oomph of flavor that you just cannot, once you've had it, you will never not have it. It's like next level. It just takes it like up to here. The chocolate with the salt, it just marries the flavors together and it really gives that chocolate a punch. So I'm a big fan of salt. I joked with you that never trust a cookie that doesn't have salt. So if you come across, I think there might be one recipe. Is it the Viennese world? There is one recipe. So don't hold me to that quote entirely, but there is one recipe that doesn't have salt, but otherwise there is salt in every recipe and oftentimes on top.
So during the past holiday weekend, I was making these cookies that I love, brown butter. They've got the little mini Cadbury eggs in them. It's this recipe I've like perfected over the years of like craving this candy. And I made it and my in-laws were in town visiting and I was taking a bite of one and I was like, something's off here. What is going on? It was good. I didn't love and then the lightning bolt in my head that I had been so distracted when they came out of the oven, I forgot that dusting of salt. And it is the game changer.
It absolutely is.
You can put it on after, but it's not going to stick. The nice thing about putting the salt on right when they come out of the oven is the salt melts a little into that top surface of the cookie and becomes so good.
So good.
I want to see the comment section or the chat or whatever light up with people like testify about salt. Let's have something where we're just getting in there and like talking about some stuff.
Yes, the salt is it's just mandatory. And if you don't believe us, just try it once and I promise you'll be hooked.
Yeah, we can't be wrong, right? We've done books. Like
we've made way too many cookies to be wrong.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that chocolate was your favorite chapter. And
Yes.
if anyone spends time on Brown Butter Blondie and on your Instagram, chocolate gets like center stage.
Yes. I'm
So
a
tell us
huge
about this
chocolate
love
fan.
affair for chocolate. Where do your ideas come from? Because if you spend time in the chocolate chapter of this book, there's no disappointment to be had. I mean, none
Thank
whatsoever.
you. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to have a nice variety of, yes, those are the chocolate truffle cookies. Amazing. Yes. That's a whipped Nutella ganache, which I'm not a Nutella fan, honestly, but when you put it in ganache and then whip it, oh my gosh, it's next level. The chocolate chapter was the easiest chapter for me to write or to develop the recipes for, because I do have an insatiable love of chocolate. And I think that comes from, well, probably my mom. I have her to thank for my chocolate chip cookie a day habit. I've been eating a chocolate chip cookie every day for as long as I can remember. So I always had that little bit of chocolate at the end of the day. And if for some reason there's not a cookie around, I'll have a piece of dark chocolate. Obviously, back in the toffee days, all of our toffee was covered in chocolate. So I was getting lots of chocolate at the toffee box. So yeah, again, I love chocolate. I love to photograph it. I love to eat it. I love to talk about it. I just think it's an amazing ingredient. It has such, there's so many different kinds of chocolate. There's an amazing recipe in the book with a caramelized white chocolate, which is, yes. If you haven't tried that either, you need to, go straight there, because that's such an amazing ingredient and it's so easy to make it. It looks like you'd think it'd be complicated, but you just need a sheet pan and an oven and white chocolate. That's it.
Yeah, it is so easy. And the flavor that develops is the best surprise of all.
Yeah, it's so deep, right? It's like a very, it's so good.
White chocolate's not like my favorite thing. I don't find myself craving white chocolate, but when you caramelize it,
yes. It takes an entirely different flavor profile when you caramelize it. Yeah.
All right, let's see. Tara has said, I love the scale concept because I'm not I think you said a book baker, but maybe you meant good baker, but I would say you probably are. And cookies always taste different. You just wish you could get cookies to look the same. So Heather, tell us like how to get cookies to look like they do in the book. So what are the tips and tricks?
Well, they're in the book. So they're definitely in that forward section of the book. I talk a lot about, like I said, ingredients and then equipment that I use to make the cookies look pretty. And each recipe is written, I know you've taken some time to look through them, is written in a lot of detail. So I'm explaining every single step-by-step process all the way through assembling the ice cream sandwiches to help you get that really pretty look. So there's just a lot of tips. Number one, the scale, but not only to weigh your dry ingredients, I use the scale when I scoop my cookies to make sure that they're exactly the same weight in ounces, so that when they bake, they're all the same size and then they'll sandwich perfectly together. So you get two, bang for your buck, double bang for your buck with that kitchen scale, especially when it comes to sandwich cookies. So cookie scoop, the scale, when this cookies come out of the oven, another really great trick that, is sort of all over the internet these days is taking like a biscuit cutter or a really large, round cookie cutter, and you swirl around the outside of the cookie when it's warm. And that helps you get them all into equal shape, because, every cookie is, no matter what, it's going to, like, one side's going to nudge out a little bit more than another. So you use that little cookie scoot action to kind of bring them back together and get them all the same size. And then I'm a really big fan. I know sometimes people are just in a hurry, or they just want to get the cookie in their mouth, and also they'll take a knife and just spread the frosting on, which is totally fine, especially if you're not serving them to anybody and you don't need them to look pretty. But I really like to put my frostings and fillings into a piping bag with a nice, pretty big star tip and give it a swirl, because that's where you get all those pretty swirls. And it's really easy to do. And it also helps you kind of help with, portioning out your fillings. So.
Yeah, I was just looking through the book. So talking about the piping tip, these are the Viennese whirls that they're number one on my list. I'll be baking these like maybe tomorrow even, because I'm craving them. Right. I love Viennese whirls, but I love, like you were saying, how you not only piped the cookie dough, but you piped the buttercream, and then there's a delicious jam that strawberries are coming into season here in Alabama. So I am like in strawberry mode, but I'm also in this whole Viennese whirl mode, and the piping tip makes those so show-stopping beautiful.
Yeah, it does. It just gives them that extra little something to make them look special,
Yeah, and Samantha has sent a question in. She said, do you have any tips to share about photographing food? I am just starting my own Instagram food series and would love to hear the tips. And Heather, your photos are so beautiful and so mouth-watering. I think this is the perfect question for you to answer about how to make your food look beautiful.
Oh gosh, that's a whole nother Zoom call, but yeah. My first tip would be, obviously you need to have great lighting when you're taking photographs of food. You need to use a great camera if you can get your hands on one. Making the food look as beautiful and real as possible is the goal, the end goal. And you also, I think, for things like photographing a cookbook, the really important part was to pull out that wow factor of every recipe. So you have to sort of decide, is this cookie gooey, or is it decadent? Is it luscious, chocolatey, melty? Is it, you kind of have to figure out what am I going for here? And what do I want to pull out of this, what do I want to make it shine in this photo? So the food photography, there's obviously a lot to it. I'm still learning. We're all still learning. It's a never ending process, but it was really fun to photograph the book, and I was really proud of how it turned out.
Well, I just have to say, from another content creator to another, you have such a way of making, I don't even want to use the word simple, because that doesn't sound the right way that I want to praise you, but you use the elements of the recipe to make it look so mouthwatering. I mean, you're not distracting people with anything else. It's
right. I have a very minimalistic approach, I would say. Yes. Because it is about the food, I don't know that anyone cares that I have 15 different props in the picture with the cookie. I just want to see the cookie, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like I have these questions planned, but I love that the audience is already weighing in. So if anything comes in, please jump in. But one thing I do want us to talk about is you talk about this chocolate chip cookie a day habit, which I love. I'm like all about it. But are you making a batch of, you're making a batch of dough, let's say it makes 48 cookies or 24 cookies. Yeah. What are you doing? You're not baking all of those and then eating them over 24 days. What are you doing?
So I'm a big fan of the freezer stash. I love to make a batch of cookies. And obviously this happened a lot when I was doing the recipe testing for the book, because when you're not just making one cake or one pie, you're making, like you said, like 24, 36 cookies. And so there was cookies around constantly. And when you're trusting the recipes, you might nail it on the first try. You bake off a couple batches, you see that it's consistent, the taste is good, that, it looks pretty, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm done. But then you have all this extra dough, and I don't like to waste butter and sugar and all that good stuff, chocolate especially. So I would just scoop it out, freeze it on a cookie sheet that's maybe lined with parchment or wax paper, and you freeze it for about an hour till the dough balls get nice and firm. And then you just pop them in a plastic bag, label it with the cookie type and the date, and pop it in the freezer. And then when you have that craving, which for me is every day after dinner, you just take one out of the freezer and pop it in your toaster oven or turn on your big oven if you need to, and just bake one or two off at a time. And that way, cookies are just better when they're fresh from the oven, in my personal opinion. Even an hour or 2 hours later, they're better than the next day or 3 days later. And when you make a batch of chocolate chip cookies and it sits around for 3 days, they're just simply not as good. So the freezer stash is where it's at. And if you're not on that bandwagon, you need to get on it.
Well, speaking of that bandwagon, Kelly has said, my frozen cookie balls never turn out as if it were refrigerated. Are there any tips that you would give to her if she's scooping and refrigerating, and then she's scooping and freezing, and she's seeing differences in the result? And maybe Kelly, stay in chat with us. Let us know if we get, I want to make sure we're talking about what's going on in your kitchen. It's hard, sometimes we don't know the recipe you're using, so we are going to do our guesswork here. Yes. Heather, what would you say, if a frozen cookie dough ball is not baking as beautifully as refrigerated, what may be going on?
Well, it's really hard to say, like you said, because it depends on the recipe. It depends on how long you're leaving it in the freezer or the refrigerator. If you're putting it in the refrigerator, it's going to only have a shelf life of a little while. If you're freezing it, it's going to be able to stick around a little bit longer. One mistake I think people make sometimes too is they think they're supposed to take the cookie, and maybe for some recipes you do, but for mine, you don't. They're taking the cookie out of the freezer and then letting it sit out to defrost, and then they bake it. Mine goes straight from freezer to oven. And that's just how I do it. And I, maybe need another minute of time in the oven at the most, but that's just how I do it. So.
And Kelly, if you want to weigh in too, are you adding the minute or two to the bake time, or you're not letting it thaw? Are you, like, if we get the info in here in the chat, we'll keep talking about it. And I love that. That's what, I want tonight to feel like, we're talking about your book, we're celebrating it.
I want to give people answers. They need answers.
but I want Bakers Unite. We love to talk through things. She said, yes, she does it straight from the freezer, and she does add a few more minutes in the oven. Okay. So once she tries your recipes, maybe she'll find the perfect freezer stash.
Yeah. Well, I would just say maybe, don't leave them in the freezer for too long. I think my max is like, 2 months at the most in the freezer. So maybe you're pulling some old cookies out, or I think that for me, putting it in the freezer is like, oh, now I don't have to make a whole batch of cookies. I have one from the freezer. I'll pop one in the oven and I can pour myself some almond milk. Is it necessarily going to be as amazing as that freshly scooped dough straight from the bowl into the, probably, there's going to be a little bit of a difference. A fresh cookie is a fresh cookie. It's really hard to beat. But again, I don't like to have just baked off cookies sitting around, because I just think that kind of, the flavor just kind of goes downhill after a day or two.
Yeah. And, one thing I would say to Kelly is that, when you're scooping and then refrigerating, you're doing that uncovered. So like, you're refrigerating the dough for that hour, or freezing, sorry. You are freezing for the first phase so that you're not trapping any moisture. I think that's the enemy of the freezer, is like freezer burn and ice crystals and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, make sure you're getting that good freeze on the first scoop in the freezer. And then when you bake, I will also say flour absorbs those liquids even over the time in the fridge and then the freezer. Yes. So it may have a different shape as that flour absorbs a little bit more of the moisture. So that can be
there's a lot of variables. Yeah.
But Kelly, thank you. She said, can't wait to try it out. She loves Bake from Scratch, and she's been following Heather for years. So love it.
Thank you, Kelly.
You're here, Kelly. Okay. So let's keep talking about the book. And not to say like, oh, let's celebrate failures, but let's talk about challenges. One thing in baking is we don't make everything perfect the first time. That's why we test things. That's why we spend a lot of time developing the recipes that we share with people. Tell us about a few or one recipe in the book that maybe just really racked your brain, or it took a little extra effort to get there. And, every day is different. It's humid in the South. It's not humid where you are, maybe, who knows? So give us an example of something that took a little extra power to get that recipe out.
I will. First, I'm going to laugh though, because I'm noticing your sweatshirt, which says croissant, correct? Yes. So if you want to talk actual baking fails outside of cookies, that is my largest baking fail ever. I have tried croissants over and over again. I've flown to Paris and made them in Paris with someone by my side, and they turned out amazing, of course. And then I come home, I try to make them at home, and they're not terrible. They're just never like, that great. So I end up just trashing them and running to the local bakery that makes amazing croissants because I'm having that craving. Anyway, I still have to nail the croissants, but I'm determined I'm going to do it. As far as cookies go, I think that there is a little bit of a formula with cookies where general you're adding sort of the same ingredients. There's always going to be sugar. There's always going to be flour. There's always going to be eggs. There's always going to be butter for the most part. So it's just a lot of playing around with different proportions. And then obviously you're introducing some different flavor profile to each cookie to get that different flavor combination. I think that the cookies I struggled with the most, there were a couple of chocolate cookies that I struggled with a little bit. But I, turned that around pretty quickly. But I think anything with moisture in it. So the pumpkin spice cookie was a little tough at first. Too much pumpkin will overpower, the dry ingredients. And then you just kind of get this really like way too moist cookie that spreads too much. But the end result is like literally perfection. I hope you will all try that pumpkin spice cookie because it's so good. And then the carrot cake cookie, which was an Easter favorite this last weekend with the brown butter cream cheese frosting. That's actually in both of those cookies. Again, with the carrots, you've got moisture and you're getting involved. And that's different when you're putting them into a cake, I think, but obviously when you're putting in a cookie and it's also a small little, so those were both a little bit tricky. And I think it was obviously the added moisture. I just had to find the right balance. And so that took a little bit of time.
And I think even for home bakers to understand, like strawberries, carrots, all these things that every season they're different. The water content is different in the strawberries in Alabama than maybe the ones you're buying in California, or the cherries that are fresh from Washington State may not have the same water content. And it's hard, as recipe creators, we don't know the water content of every single thing based on the seasonal changes. Right. So if someone makes a recipe and they see, like you did with the carrots, what kind of adjustments were you making as you said, oh, it's spreading too much. Oh, it's looking, it's not looking the right way, so that a home baker that maybe they're even following your recipes or my recipes and they still have that issue. Like, how do you start troubleshooting? Where do you add flour? Do you take away liquid? What happens?
Yeah, a little bit of both. And I would say that the trial and error is definitely something to remember if you're doing it on your own and sort of recipe testing or trying to make your own recipes of your favorite things, is to eliminate or add one ingredient at a time, because otherwise you don't know which thing worked. So I think I started by adding more flour because that just sort of seemed easiest. I started scaling back the carrots. I started patting down the carrot so that taking the moisture out. There were a lot of different, ways that you can go. Less sugar even will help. Like less granulated sugar means the cookies won't spread as much. So there were a lot of tricks. I can't remember what the end result finally was that made it a winner, but I finally did nail it. I was sure to write that down real quick. It's like, yes, I finally got it.
And I think for home bakers too, they should take a pen and write in all of our books what they did that made that recipe work perfect or better or whatever for your kitchen, for your ingredients, and all of those different variables.
Yes.
It even comes down to using different brands of flour because the protein content is different. It comes down to using different butters. And maybe you want to talk about what kind of butter you develop your recipes with, because I find in cookie baking, especially in something like a Blondie or a brownie or a cookie, that butter, it does make a difference in the outcome. I think because we get enough butter in there that really becomes a recipe component. So talk to us about butter in your recipes.
So I think everyone has their favorite brands of butter. I just used a standard high quality sweet cream AA butter. I don't actually I love European style butter. Don't get me wrong. I love it on my toast and waffles and, on anything. But I didn't recipe test that with my cookies because I often find that the higher fat content can make your cookies go a little wonky in the oven. So again, as much as I love European style butter, I didn't use it in this book. So as far as flour goes, I have a lot of favorites. Everyone loves just the gold medal right off it's been around forever. I really like King Arthur flour. I think the quality is really great and it's always delivers a great taste. I get a lot of questions about gluten-free flour because a lot of these recipes can easily be translated into a gluten-free recipe. So the one I love the most is the Bob's Red Mill cup for cup. And you can just substitute the all-purpose flour for exactly the same amount of the Bob's Red Mill. And I think you'll have a pretty good result. Now, we all know gluten-free cookies are just, the taste and texture is just a little different. It just always is, no matter what you do, but it's going to be pretty close.
And I think, for bakers at home should never be afraid to reach out to the content creator. So to you.
Oh, I love it when they do. Yes.
And say, I'm using this flour or this butter. Could that be a problem? And we love to say, here's what we used. We want you to have good results. And I think it's a good dialogue because, imagine the world that we're all in as content creators, that every ingredient from brand to brand to brand has different elements that can change the outcome. And absolutely. I think cookies are the one area I love seeing comments, people saying, oh, this is, where my issues tend to be, or the shape, or they don't look like the photo. I think it's like learning. Oh, and someone, Tara said no salt in the butter. She's assuming, is that right? You use
I use unsalted butter because that helps you control the amount of salt going into the recipe. If for some reason all you have is salted butter, in my book's case, you would omit the salt most likely, or at least like heavily reduce it. I think that there's salt obviously in the butter because it helps preserve it longer on the shelf. So that also can be a thing because the butter's maybe not as fresh. So that's why I go for the unsalted. And then again, you're adding salt into the recipe and you're controlling how much is going in versus just getting a random amount that happens to be in the butter.
I find most bakers will say we start with unsalted butter because we're adding our own ratios into the recipe for the right flavor. And with salted butters, it is so hard. We don't know the amount, in each slice of the butter or the part of the stick, or, it's just that guesswork is a little.
It's too variable. Yes, I agree. Plus, half the time I'm adding the salt on top of the cookie too. So it's like, that would be just way too much salt going on.
Yeah, I know. When we know we're going to add more salt, we've got to be able to control where we're getting it in.
Yes.
Well, I would love for everyone watching to also start jumping in with questions. I know we're in the last 15 minutes or so of our chat, and we promised we would leave time for Q&A. So as much as I can talk all night and into the next day about baking and Heather's beautiful book and photos and everything, we want to hear from you. So there's a Q&A and a chat room, and I'm looking at both on my screen. So wherever you want to jump in, we will be able to answer your questions. But I will just keep giving you questions until we see things coming in. And one thing I wanted to talk about was warmer weather. So you and I already referenced ice cream sandwiches because it is something people love, and I love them year round. So let's not even pretend like it has to be warm weather. But with seasonal things, what's going on in your world as we get into the warmer days, or if California ever gets the sun again? What flavors are you reaching for? What's the book got in there for this fruit-filled season that's headed our way?
Well, we're still struggling to have any kind of a spring here. So I'm still on the lemon train, which is normally like a January, February thing,
right.
The citrus season thing, but I'm eating lemon curd out of the refrigerator with a spoon on a daily basis, trying to channel some sunshine into our lives. So I'm kind of still on the lemon train, but come summer, let's hope that the weather turns around and we actually do get some bountiful fruit around here. I have some great cherry recipes in the book. There's an ice cream sandwich cookie that uses a cherry ice cream. I love cherries. It's such an amazing flavor, and it's paired with a chocolate cookie. So it's that Black Forest kind of feeling. Strawberries, obviously there's a homemade strawberry jam in the book, which is amazing in your cookies. It's also equally delightful on your morning toast, on a bagel, on a muffin. It's just so good. I'm trying to think of what else, like a lemon. There's a key lime pie cookie. So we're kind of going all in with limes. That's my husband's favorite cookie from the book. It's kind of like a graham cracker, sort of like a chocolate chip cookie, but no chocolate, right? And then graham cracker in there. So it's that kind of texture. And then a key lime pie buttercream. And then you sprinkle a little bit of lime zest around, and it's absolute heaven. It's very refreshing. It's a very refreshing flavor profile. So it's great for like a hot day in the summer, a barbecue or picnic kind of situation. There's a lot of, there is, as much as I love chocolate, my editor was like, we can't do all chocolate. I was like, I know. I'll mix some other things in there.
Editors have a way of telling us things, don't they, about what we can and can't do. And we just have to lead our way back into the stuff we crave all the time. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Okay, so Amy said, what is the easiest recipe for a very new baker? So someone starting out, I'm sure Amy has already got a scale. We should hope she does, because that's the best thing. But you tell us the best recipe in there for a new baker.
Okay, well, I'm going to kind of lump some together. I think new bakers, my go-to would be a chocolate chip cookie, because it's really kind of hard to make that go wrong. And even the chocolate chip cookie that you showed in the beginning of the talk is just got a simple vanilla buttercream inside of it. So there's not really many areas there where you can go too wrong. You're not going to have a huge baking fail with that one. I do have a favorite chocolate chip cookie that's different than that one in the book. And it's the one that's paired with the ice cream sandwich, which I call the chip witch, but better, because it's like a chip witch on crack. It's like amazing. And that chocolate chip cookie is a favorite because it starts with cold butter, which only happens a few times in the book. So cold butter straight from the fridge, and there's no chill time for that chocolate chip cookie. So you're making that dough pretty quickly, popping it straight into the oven, and you have this amazing, thick, sort of chewy, gooey chocolate chip cookie in, 15 minutes or less. It's absolutely amazing. So I would start there, or any one of the peanut butter cookies. I feel like peanut butter cookies are a good beginner cookie. I don't know. I think that those don't really ever go wrong either. So I would say those two would be a good place to start.
Well, and you give so many tips for make ahead. And that's one thing I would say for a new baker is don't overwhelm yourself in the kitchen. It can be so overwhelming. You read a recipe, you get inspired, you get in there and you're like, here we go. Oh my God, there's 86 bowls and I don't know which one has the icing sugar and which one's got the cookie sugar, and your brain's just going nuts.
Yes.
So do the bake ahead thing, do the make ahead. So get your dough, then you're filling, like step by step it. And I think this book is perfect for a new baker because you give all of that info.
Yes, absolutely. Give all the info, and all of it is literally step by step. I walk you through everything. You won't be sitting there wondering where you went, where did you go wrong? What side route did you take? It's all very well explained. And some of the cookies do get a little bit complicated, but they're, again, because they're so well explained in my mind, you won't have any trouble with them, because like there's even a Neapolitan cookie in here, which is a 3-way cookie. So it's 3 different doughs in one cookie, and it makes a beautiful cookie. It's very fall inspired. I call it the ginger doodle Neapolitan. So I think a lot of people might initially get scared off with that cookie because it's 3 doughs, and they're like, well, that seems complicated. But I had people recipe test that for me, and they're like, oh, that was easy. And then you get this amazing cookie with like 3 different flavors all in one that marry together so beautifully. Some of the cookies too have, 2 fillings. There's a peanut butter cookie that has a ganache with a peanut butter mousse. There's the lemon poppy seed cookie that has the Meyer lemon curd with a vanilla buttercream. So we're piling on all the goodies inside. And so, like you said, if you just partition them off one by one, you'll be golden.
And it was just like you said, you're eating lemon curd from the refrigerator. So it's a perfect make ahead. Have your lemon curd ready. You can do it 2 days in advance. Then you're not even stressing about it. And you just tackle things in that like easy to approach method. I love it.
Exactly.
Okay. So now we've got a question from Tara again. I love that Tara's jumping in and chatting with us. So
thank you, Tara.
Tara has also said, I love that you have a savory section. People love savory baking, of course. And how did you come up with that? But before you answer, let's just dial in on this everything bagel cracker sandwich cookie. And I love that we're reinventing the word cookie for a cream cheese filling. I mean, yes. Amen. Hello. When are we making this? It looks epic.
Okay, well, I don't know about your household, but in my house, that everything bagel seasoning goes on everything. Biscuits, salad, chicken, bagels, avocado toast. I mean, I could name like 24 things that we put that everything bagel seasoning on top of. So when I was trying to think of savory recipes for the book, I was like, oh, I have to use that because we love it and it's so good and it's good on everything. So that cracker has a little bit of Parmesan cheese in it. And then there's the, obviously flour, butter, whatnot. And then that everything bagel seasoning on the top. And it's just a really delightful, snacky kind of cracker that you can do for happy hour or take it to a picnic or a barbecue or enjoy on the porch with a glass of wine. That savory chapter came about because, again, I was trying to find a new way to, put cookies out there that was, true to my way, my style, and something different, cookies with a twist. So I thought that a lot of baking books, as much as I love just all the sweet stuff, which really I do, I'm way more sweet than I am savory. I just thought, wow, a lot of books don't have a savory section for cookies, so let's do it. And it's a smaller chapter. It's 7 recipes, but I made sure that they were all perfection. There's a cornmeal cookie in there with that one.
The Southern boy in me is just dying over here. It's like a Southerner's dream.
It really is. It's a honey mascarpone, and then you can drizzle like a wild honey on top. And then when you eat them warm, that's the one time I'll tell you, like, not to cool the cookie completely before you put the filling in, because then you got that warm cornbread with the filling. It's to die for. Yeah. So that was a fun chapter to write. It was because it got me off the sweet thing. I think I did it last and I was really burned out on all the sugar.
Push us to the brink and then see what we can do on the other side of the world.
Right.
I love it.
Yeah.
Laura has said she's so excited for her book to arrive tomorrow. So I think we're
Yay.
feeling the anticipation and the excitement. And you know what? There's 2 photos that we're just going to have to stop and like have a moment for. Who doesn't love a good whisk with the meringue on it?
Yeah.
I mean, like
It's
that.
classic.
And then chocolate lovers, look at that pipe.
That's that whipped Nutella ganache I told you about. It
That
is
is.
light. I wish that the pictures could do it
I'm
more
liking
justice.
the page. I mean, I'm liking the page.
But it is light as air. It's so light and fluffy, and it's just almost, it's rich, but it's because it's so light, it doesn't feel that rich. Does that make sense? It's
Yeah, no, well,
right.
you're
You
not
really
going to
have to
sell
make
me
it.
on it.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
like no sales pitch that's going to need for me to get there. I'm already there. I'm already
Okay, good. I'm glad I don't have to sell you on it.
Oh, and I just have to say, I mean, we're in the last few minutes of the chat, and I want you to be sure you have a minute to tell everyone, like I always say, give them the pitch, tell them why they've got to get this book. But before I do that, I just want to say you have thought of so many different approaches to the word cookie. And I think that's what I love, is seeing brownies used as a cookie. We've got the everything bagel. We've got cornbread cookies. I mean, I love when the world of food expands beyond what we thought.
Yes.
What's the one recipe in here that you might have even impressed yourself? I always say, like, what's the one thing you were like, I cannot believe we did that. You know?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I might have to take a look here. Yeah,
Look at your own book.
I mean, maybe the caramelized white chocolate cookies, because I had actually, before I wrote the book, I had never caramelized white chocolate, and I thought it was going to be really hard. And then I surprised myself and was like, well, that was really easy. And I'm definitely putting that in the book. And then the chocolate cookie that it sits on top of, or if you can, fill it between, was a little tricky for me. There's so many, the macarons, I'm not a fancy pastry chef. I'm a self-taught baker. I did make macarons before, but I made 2 for this book. I didn't want to overdo it with the macaron thing, but they're delightful flavor combinations. There's a strawberry shortcake one, and then a Bailey's buttercream, like espresso situation happening. But I nailed those macarons on the first try and got the pictures the first time around. And that made me really happy. So yeah, it's filled with so many amazing recipes. I do want to point out too, oh yes, that's the brown. So that's a black cocoa brownie.
You
And this
show
is how
people
this-
what to do.
Yeah, so this is how you assemble your brownie cookie sandwiches. You cut little squares out, and then you cut the ice cream the same size. We have a Blondie recipe in there also. And I think it's important to note that there are those recipes, the brownie recipes and the Blondie one. It's a macadamia nut Blondie. That's the chip which. Yeah. But those recipes can be made in a, in a sheet pan or a 9x13 pan. So if you are like a cookie lover, but you hate scooping cookies and standing in there all night, scooping cookies and baking a tray at a time, you can make those other recipes with, your 9x13 pan, and then you're just cutting squares and popping ice cream in the middle. So those are kind of fun, and they're easier, they're faster, they're great for serving, like again, at, big gatherings when people can just kind of go for it. So.
Well, you broke down the cookie mysteries of the world. You gave people easy solutions. You give people challenges. You give people creativity. And I absolutely love it. For everyone watching, and I think Erin just dropped a link into the chat, how you support Heather, how you support Book Larder is you buy the book. That is how we all as content creators continue to bring you more delicious things. And Heather's book is one you need on your shelf. I mean, even the back cover. Hello. So no matter where you have it at home, and I know this little cushion will be perfect for a nap when you've had a great day of baking, order this book. And I am so thankful to everyone that tuned in for this too. Heather, congratulations. And it's such a beautiful book.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a delight to chat with you about the book, and I really do appreciate it. And to everyone that came, thank you so much. I'm always available for questions anytime through my Instagram, Brown Butter Blondie. You can email me on my blog. I'm happy to answer questions. Like Brian said, we love to answer questions.
Yeah.
Don't be shy. And even just send me a note if you try a recipe and you say that you tell me you loved it, or, that someone you gave it to loved it. And if you did buy the book and you bake from it, I'd be so grateful if you could leave a review from wherever you bought it. That really helps authors, right? Get the word out that it's a great book. So thank you.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Heather and Brian, for taking the time to join us today. That was amazing. And thank you all for tuning in. And again, this talk was recorded and it'll be available on our YouTube page in the next day or two. And in the chat, you'll find the link to Heather's book. And I also popped in the link to pre-order Brian's Bake from Scratch, Volume 7. And so grab those two when you're there, and have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you, everybody.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. It was fun.
So fun. Are we off?